Hey there YouTube, I'm Yukitsu, this is Yukitsu Times, welcome to my channel, welcome back to a little bit of Battlefleet Gothic Armada 2. So today I'm going to be talking a little bit about the Craftword Eldar after that patch. And things I'm a little bit worried about and things that I'm hoping they are careful about in the future of patching. Not that I think that anyone working over there is going to actually look at this video or anything like that, but I think that they've done some good things with this patch, but I think that their methodology of how they're patching is a little bit flawed, and I'll get into that. So, first of all, major changes. There's been accumulated changes to the Imperial Navy where they're quite a bit different in some ways than they were before, but they're mostly just a little bit more powerful. Massive buffs across the board for Adeptus Mechanicus. They're quite a lot stronger. I'll have to figure out if they're actually good now as a result of that. Huge nerfs to the Craftword Eldar. And successive nerfs to the Tyranids that have made them a lot weaker than they were before. So we'll see where that leaves some of these factions. But I'm going to be talking mostly about the Craftword Eldar in this particular one because I think that their changes are the most emblematic, along with the Adeptus Mechanicus, of I think what they're trying to do. So my idea of what they're trying to accomplish with their patches is they're just trying to get the numbers in the right place. The massive buffs across the board to the Adeptus Mechanicus for pretty much everything that they have really indicates to me that they're just trying to get them up to about a 50% win rate come hell or high water. They don't really care how it happens. Same thing with the Craftword Eldar's nerfs. I think they're just trying to hit them as hard as they can in whichever ways they can think of to try and get them down to about a 50% win rate. And this to me tells me two things about their way of changing the game. One, they don't actually know what the problems are. They don't know why Adeptus Mechanicus is weak, so they're just buffing everything and hoping that fixes the problem. And they don't know what is wrong with Craftword Eldar, which is why you see nerfs rather to two very, very different mentalities here. They've nerfed the Spirit Stone targeting node, made it basically out of the game, and they're trying to make it so that they can't use missiles, or torpedoes rather. So those are basically polar opposite abilities. Maybe they were both broken, but I highly doubt that was the case there. I think it's just simply a case of them not really understanding what it was that made these factions the way they were. And the other problem is I don't think that they've taken much consideration for what factions are necessarily supposed to be good at when they're trying to get them down to that 50%. Because every faction sort of has an identity of what they're good at and a bunch of different strategies that can be viable for them. For the Craftword Eldar, that sort of identity and that way of playing was basically that they had torpedo spreads and that they were very, very good at getting in close range, using a whole bunch of torpedoes, and then sort of getting into a bit of a close range brawl with whatever's left over. That's fine. That's kind of the way that you sort of play these guys. There's other ways that you could potentially play them, but that's what they excel at. And they've kind of tried to remove that from the game, which leaves them in a bit of a limbo where, assuming they succeed at making it so that they don't just go in and torpedo all your ships to death, they don't have an identity left over. There's no reason to play them if you eliminate that. Now, they didn't even succeed at making them not overpowered, and they didn't succeed at making it not so that you don't just run in and instantly destroy like the enemy's admiral ship with a bunch of torpedoes. So that's the other issue with this particular patch. They still are actually probably the same problem that they were before. So let's say that you're playing as the Craftword Eldar and you're up against the Tau Protector fleet and they've got their Custodian out there. You're both relatively bad players, but you're the Eldar player, you just sort of right-click on their Custodian and then launch all your torpedoes at sort of medium range. That's something that I've done against plenty of players who don't know what they're doing. And then the Custodian immediately explodes, and then the rest of their fleet's kind of easy pickings after that. That didn't require more than one volley of torpedo. They didn't fix that particular problem. And once you get up to higher levels where you start seeing people actually layering on protection and defenses against your torpedoes and they're properly defending themselves against them, you still end up in the situation where as a relatively decent Craftword Eldar player, you can get guaranteed torpedo strikes still. You just wait until you're just about to see that blue line disappearing, and then you fire your torpedoes. And you're practically guaranteed hits because there's no animation for the torpedo as it exits the tube. There's a small delay before the arming process, and then they can see it. But if the arming process is at the moment that their ship is getting hit, they can't react to it. So that's one of the sort of reasons why this is still not necessarily... this is still a bit of a problem. It's really easy to hit people with torpedoes if you sort of are paying attention to what you're doing and are trying really hard to get those torpedo hits. And you don't, again, necessarily need more than one torpedo hit per ship. So This, I think, just makes the Craftword Eldar really, really powerful at that type of gameplay. And yeah, that's still going to be a major issue, is that lack of counterplay against that massive spread of torpedoes that deals humongous amounts of damage. So to a certain extent, I think they failed at actually nerfing them. I think that top-level players are still going to actually do quite well with these guys. Let's take a look at the actual changes there. There's another change that I want to just comment on as well. But first of all, Blessing of Vol changed, as along with all the other armor-penetrating macro upgrades. I have mixed feelings about this. I've never really liked armor-penetrating macro weapons being in the game to begin with. I think there needs to be a firmer identity of armor-penetrating weapons versus non-armor-penetrating weapons, and they need to adjust the numbers so that both of them are viable, so that it feels rewarding to have heavily armored ships, not just having everyone running around and ignoring that. This does change that for the better, because if you've got a heavily armored ship, you're taking less damage against armor-penetrating weapons, as opposed to people who don't have armor-penetrating weapons. So it's still actually a good deal for people who have heavy armor. They still take less damage than low-armored enemies, but it's not a great fix. And also it affected lances. I think lances should definitely be the go-to if you want to penetrate armor. So I think that that's just a kind of neither here nor there kind of change. I think that I've got mixed feelings about this one. I definitely think that lances should reduce armor to 50, though. Other than that, though, I want to talk a little bit about Ship of the Dead. This is actually really, really good now. The reason is that you can now select this after you figured out what your opponent is. So if I know that my opponent is going to be Space Marines, I can take Ship of the Dead. If I know my opponent is going to be Tyranids, I can take Ship of the Dead. If I'm not fighting any of those sort of things there, I can take something else instead. It's actually makes this really, really viable, and it makes it really powerful. So anyway, let's talk a bit about the other changes that they've made here. Man, I'm just super dehydrated right now. Alright, so the other changes that they made here. It doesn't actually show here, but they only have one set of torpedoes. So you still fire 4 projectiles, you still have the same number of torpedo tubes. It's just that you only have one chance to fire with them. And this is the big nerf to these guys, and I think it's what is sort of going to kill off this faction as one that I really care to play as. The fact that they've only got one set of torpedoes is only really relevant for the Starfall Dragon ship. The Prismatic Wraith ship has got 4 torpedoes per volley and was never really a problem to begin with. In fact, if you play as the Craftword or Corsair Eldar, they still have that type of torpedo volley, the one that you had from the Prismatic Wraith ship before, and they're able to just sort of continually do that 3 times like you used to be able to. It does the same damage. It's still the same sort of style. The only ship that was a problem was the Starfall Dragon ship, and technically, I guess, the Firestorm Dragon ship. But because they've sort of nerfed all of the torpedo-carrying ships for the Craftword Eldar, they're actually worse now at that torpedo game to a certain extent, except for the upfront damage that you can still get out of the Firestorm and the Starfalls. So these are still the problem ships there. You can still instantly alpha strike and destroy an enemy admiral ship if they're not paying attention, and if they are paying attention and you're just really quite good at micromanaging all your torpedoes, you can still delete an admiral ship in a very, very frightening small amount of time. So they haven't really fixed that problem in the way that they probably needed to. The other change that they've done is that the pulsars, every ship that was armed with pulsars had its cost reduced by a little bit there, and pulsars deal more damage. So this is a lot of changes that have occurred to these. They've had their crit chance increased, they've had their damage increased, and they've had their cost decreased, which, if anyone was doubting that these were a crap weapon before, that is kind of an indicator that they were not being taken seriously by anybody, and for good reason. This does actually push them into the realm of viability, but I don't think that the Craftword Eldar are the ones that get the best use out of this. This is a better weapon on the Corsair Eldar, because it's a hit-and-run type of weapon, and it's really, really good at that. The Corsairs are better ships for hit-and-run style attacks there, as opposed to the Craftword Eldar, which really don't rely on that style of attack all that often. So I don't think that I'm likely to take tons of pulsar cannons for the Craftword Eldar. It's still just too hard to shred through the armor or shields of enemy ships and then deal the damage with the pulsars, because their ship configurations are just not well designed for that combination. Whereas if I play the Corsairs, I can have the Vol, I can spam out 5 Vols, for example, and I've got less macro cannon damage than the Starfalls, but I've also got the same amount of pulsar damage as the Firestorm Dragon ship. I've still got good macro cannon damage, not as much as the Starfall, about as much as the Prismatic. And then I've got the 4 torpedoes, so it's like fusing together a Prismatic Wraith ship with a Firestorm Dragon ship, but then also giving it the Shroud hull. So it becomes a much, much more powerful ship at that style of fighting. and it's also better at using torpedoes, just in the sense of if you want to go for reliability, they're more reliable than the Starfall Dragon ship. So I think that they've failed in a bunch of ways with this particular patch. They've made this faction a lot less fun to play. They're a little bit more frustrating to play as. They're still incredibly frustrating to play against because they can still alpha strike and destroy a bunch of your ships with their torpedo bullshit. And they've lost their identity as a faction. If I wanted to play a faction that just is going to go around using humongous amounts of macro damage and they're Eldar, then the Dark Eldar are actually really, really good at that. They're way better than the Craftword Eldar at it. If they wanted to have a faction that's capable of doing really weird hit-and-run type attacks with torpedo runs, dive in, do some torpedo damage, do a huge amount of weapon damage all in a single run, the Corsairs are way better at that style of fighting. And sort of down the line, there's nothing really in particular that is the way that this faction is supposed to fight anymore, that you can't think of other factions that do it way better. You could say that these guys are the durable faction, and that still is true, but they're not really durable enough to justify taking them when they still die fairly quickly. Their ships are pretty fragile for how expensive they are. They're good for their class. Like, there's nothing wrong with the Firestorm Dragon ship or the Starfall Dragon ship in terms of a cruiser with the stats that it has, but there is something wrong with a ship that costs as much as they do, having the durability that they do. So there is kind of that instead. In addition, they're actually fairly easy to disable through crits because they've only got one solar sail, whereas if I did take the vol spam, I'd have 3 solar sails per ship, making them a lot harder to disable. So that's kind of the state that we find ourselves in. They've made it so that these guys are still broken, they're still going to be overpowered, but they're not as interesting or fun to play. So my proposed change would actually be that, make it so that this torpedo, one of the things that they've got with this is that you can see the text here, fires 8 projectiles and inflict 90 damage ignoring armor. You can sort of go here, and I can't remember actually if it applies to these guys as torpedoes or which which sets it specifically. I'm pretty sure these guys have normal torpedoes, but I'm gonna just have to eat my own words in a second here. All right, so we can take these guys as torpedoes here. 6 projectiles that inflicts 110 damage, reducing armor by 25. Right, so I was right here. So instead of actually dealing 90 damage like the Eldar torpedoes do, these things actually have the armor affect it, which means that against heavy armor, it's going to do less than half of that, and against lesser armor, it's going to do more than the listed value against every other value, but it's still dealing a lot less damage per hit. So this is what a standard torpedo is like. It's a lot less problematic in the sense that even if I've got, say, 6 tyrants or something like that, and I just fire all 36 torpedoes, no one complains about that right now. And the reason is that it's not likely to instantly melt a single ship down to nothing in one volley because of that mechanic of them having to go through armor. So I think what they probably should realize is that the upfront damage is the major problem there, and the lack of counterplay against those types of torpedoes is the other problem. So what I would do as a proposed solution is they would have one set of the torpedoes that deal 90 damage and ignore armor, and that torpedo would have a longer arming distance, and it would have a slower travel speed. The numbers would have to be adjusted to figure out the right balance of that, but you would want it to be something that people could potentially avoid, something that has lots of counterplay against it, so you can see them coming, you can do something about it. Your turrets are going to take out more of them, your fighters are going to take out more of them, and make it so that there's just more ability to react against those torpedoes. And then you give them 3 sets of perfectly regular torpedoes. They travel at the normal speed. They're going to be really easy to land and hit with the Craftword Eldar. You're going to be able to get guaranteed hits with them, but they're going to be doing a lot less damage. Way less damage. And because of that, even if you land a whole bunch of waves of torpedoes with that regular type, it's not going to instantly blow up an enemy ship that should be able to survive that kind of thing. And if your opponent is protecting themselves even the least little bit against torpedoes, you won't be able to just right-click an enemy ship and then fire all your torpedoes. That just won't work anymore. So that would give this faction the ability to still be that faction that lurks around, goes for that perfect angle, dives in, gets that massive torpedo volley, and then just goes for the short-range torpedo trades. That's going to sort of still be their identifying thing. It's the thing that makes them interesting, engaging, and unique to play. But it allows for more counterplay, which still isn't present. There's no counterplay against the torpedoes if they're guaranteed to hit. Mind you, the guaranteed hits are only from good players, but that's sort of what they're trying to nerf, is the ability for the top-tier players to dominate the game. So anyway, let's go ahead and pick the same fleet that we were using previously. It's gotten me like 5 wins out of 7 games since the patch, which is a pretty good ratio considering like I'm still trying to figure certain things out. And since they've also nerfed the factions like so hard, you'd think that that would have gone down. Because I'm not necessarily the best player out there in terms of my micromanagement control and stuff like that. What I'm really sort of best at is just figuring out what the ships are good for and using them in that capacity. So we'll see what sort of matchup we're in though. There are certain matchups where I think the Craftword Eldar are overly dominant still, and others that they're just really bad against. Like, they're actually really, really powerful in the Eldar versus Eldar matchup. The combination of Holofields plus 67 armor is really hard for other Eldar to deal with because... Oh, shit. Let's just see if I can get into this. But yeah, like, because of that, the Dark Eldar suffer really badly against the Craftword Eldar. It's just really hard for them to keep their weapons facing and to actually effectively run away from Craftword Eldar. Craftword Eldar eventually do run them down. And it's also really hard to play against them as the Corsairs, because the Corsairs typically have Pulsars in fairly large numbers in their fleets. Pulsars just don't work at all against the Craftword Eldar. So you suffer a lot because of that. Factions that I think sort of like really work well against them right now, I think the Imperials, now that they've been buffed over and over and over again, are really good. The Necrons are kind of really good against Eldar right now as well. There's just too many ways for them to block your torpedoes and stuff like that, but there are ways that you can actually play against Necrons as the Eldar that kind of negate a lot of the strengths of the Necrons. I'm going to show you how I play against these guys nowadays. I don't like it, but it's the way I play it. Like I said, I think that the Necrons are a super poorly designed faction in terms of just how they impact the game, but let's go with the Stasis Bomb. Let's go with the Maelstrom. Let's go with the Blessing of Vol. And let's go with the Kincrude batteries. Going to set our range to 4,500. Going to start ourselves off, though, in Brace for Impact stance. The reason is that if he just sort of pops onto my face and tries to use all of his damage all at once there, I want to be able to soak that and not die immediately. That would be lovely. So switch out to that stance there. Looks like he's probably gone for a fairly heavy fleet composition here. Folks firing weapons. He's probably got Tesseract Crypts, so there's no point in going for the other stuff. And I find that you can't disable their engines before they jump anyway, so... Let's do this here. I think we move over actually and get this afterwards. Might as well. So we're going to go through for the sort of 3 mid-capture points, I guess. After we grab this, we're going to spread our fleet out, though. So I'm actually thinking he's got maybe 2 cruisers and a Cairn or something like that. Or I'm not sure, actually. These feel like they're moving pretty fast. This might be a light cruiser, but if it's a light cruiser, why isn't it stealthing? Maybe it just doesn't like stealth, I guess. I don't know. I feel like this is the sort of composition I'm up against where they probably actually do have the micro or mass recalls. Oh, shit. Well, I guess I'm identified. Alright, well... I love how there's just an asteroid field in the middle of this capture point. Like, that's kind of annoying, but if I had seen him launching the fighters, you can actually see the silhouette of the ships as they launch fighters. Which is probably... It feels like that's kind of a bug, but... Whatever they want to do. Alright, so we're going to be moving in. I'm going to go ahead and spread my fleet out here. Why? Just because I don't want to take as much damage from that initial burst there. But what we are going to do is actually just point and click one of his ships here. And just move in close and just kill it. Alright, so yeah, they've got the Karen back there. Looks like I'm getting critical to hell here, which is unfortunate. Oh, there goes my bridge. Really? God damn it. Wait, where are my torpedoes here? Okay, I have to get this guy onto that. Well, there goes my admiral. That's unfortunate. Oh, shit. Wrong ship had the torpedoes. Just going to switch to this here. All right, so and this is how you fight Necrons right now. It's kind of stupid, but there's not a whole ton of counterplay that Necrons have against that. I forgot to set to rapid reload early enough. I should have done that way earlier, but yeah, I mean, I like I said, actually, oh shit, this guy's a level 23 legendary Necron player. So, like, Craftword Eldar are still broken. They're not just a little bit too broken. Oh my god, he's even got the scarabs. So this is just frustrating to me because it's clear that Craftword Eldar are still ridiculously overpowered in their own sort of weird way. This was a really good Necron player. This was like one of the best Necron players out there, and I just basically right-clicked his stuff and he died. So, like, that should really just tell you this is not a fair or balanced faction. This was not a well-designed or well-thought-out nerf. The problem was, like, he took a ton of damage because I was able to figure out when to use those torpedoes, and because he lost his sort of ability to counterplay against them, he immediately just lost his big capital ship there. And, like, the numbers are a little bit weird because, like, Necron ships are actually quite bad for their cost at brawling, but, like, that's a different issue. But yeah, like, all I had to do was sort of right-click, not move very much, because moving against Necrons causes you to just bump into their ships as they inertialist drive, and just fire away. Like, I don't know what to say about that match because it was just that janky, and that even propelled me like into mid-legendary. This is just, but or maybe not, I guess, actually, apparently. But either way, like, this is one of those sort of situations where the changes, I think, miss the mark in two different ways. They make the faction substantially less interesting to play, but they're still overpowered. And that might be enough to actually fix the numbers, because if all the people sort of drop off from playing the Craftword Eldar and play a different faction instead, because it's just not any fun to play a faction that's been this defanged, then maybe they'll think that this worked because the numbers will reflect that. But the reality is that it's just, they've removed sort of the core reason why I would play this faction to begin with. And that's really a bad reason to, that's a really bad mentality and unhealthy way to patch a game. They really need to think about sort of what they want this faction to be good at and what they want it to do, and then introduce ways for that to work in the context of the game where people can play against it, and where it's still both rewarding and reliable for the craft-rolled Eldar player. Right now, it's not necessarily reliable, but it's still super rewarding and still extremely potent when you're playing the craft-rolled Eldar correctly. But it's super frustrating to play as them as well. If I was against a Necron opponent who thought that I was not a moron, because I think that's why he was using his abilities, is he thought I was a moron. It would have been so much easier for him to have won that if he had blocked a bunch of my torpedoes with the Star Pulse generators. Maybe he also used them because he thought I was going to fire them at certain points in time there, where I was waiting for him to Star Pulse though. So that could also be the reason that happened. Not 100% sure, but it's just not a well-designed patch. It doesn't provide the sort of counterplay against those torpedoes that you need to have. It's still an all or nothing thing. If those torpedoes hit, you just lose. The only difference now is that the craft-rolled Eldar only gets one chance to do it, and if you're a good craft-rolled Eldar player, only one chance is all you need. And I did flub one of my volleys of torpedoes, actually. I thought I had the long-range guy firing, and unfortunately it was the close-range guy. So yeah, I did flub one wave of torpedoes. Not perfect play. Still managed to win against a legendary Necron player. The changes that they made here are I think good in some ways and bad in some ways. But the most important negative to take away from this for me is that they've really gone ahead and made it so that this they've sort of shown their hand in terms of their philosophy for balance patching this game. They need to have a more cohesive approach to balancing the game and making sure that the factions remain fun to play, have a strong identity, and are, balanced. That's an important part of it, but it's not the only consideration when you're doing a balance patch. I think that this is going to require more nerfs. They still have to keep nerfing this faction here, and they need to improve it as well. They need to show that this faction has a reason for you to play it, other than it being really, really strong. And I'm not entirely sure what they're going to do about that, but we'll see what it is. Anyway, hope you found this video enjoyable, and of course, as always, hope to see you guys all next time.